And so everybody is suffering. And in fact, Powell admitted when he talked about the economy, he said, look, overall, the economy is good. But, for the lower end, they're having a hard time, right? He said that they're struggling. And he said they're struggling because of inflation. Okay, well, why is there inflation? Who caused that? The Fed. The Fed caused that inflation. They printed all the money. They're the ones that inflate the money supply, nobody else. And so if Powell admits the lower income people, and it's not just lower income, a lot of middle income people are suffering from inflation. That's why they voted for Trump. But if he admits that they're struggling and they're suffering, well, he ought to accept responsibility for their plight because he is the architect of what's been built here. But if inflation is still a problem, do something about it. Don't keep throwing gasoline on the fire by keeping interest rates too low, which is what he's done, and by continuing to expand the money supply, even though they're still doing quantitative tightening. And they did announce that there was no change to the QT program, so they are continuing to slowly shrink the balance sheet. Now, at some point, they are going to give that up. I mean, I've been saying that I thought the Fed was going to return to quantitative easing, and I still think that that's going to happen, but it just hasn't happened yet. Now, also, he talked about that overshoot, right? He mentioned that, yes, we were targeting inflation of 2.1 or 2.2. That was our goal. We wanted to be a little above it, but there was an unexpected overshoot that was due to an exogenous event, meaning the pandemic. So hey, it's not our fault, right? We couldn't control this. It's just the pandemic happened, and that's why we had inflation. No, the pandemic didn't cause inflation. It was the way the Fed reacted to the pandemic. That's what caused the inflation. In fact, the Fed encouraged it. If you remember, and I talked about this, Powell actually told the U.S. government early in the pandemic, run big deficits, spend a bunch of money, I will monetize it. Whatever you need, we'll print it. That's why we had inflation. The pandemic didn't do that. We did that to ourselves. Right? So to say, well, we had no control, it was just this pandemic, we had complete control. We decided to trade inflation for the recession that we would have had we taken a more responsible response to the pandemic. So instead of pain then, we chose pain later in the form of more inflation. So what Powell should say is, hey, look, yes, I know the lower class is suffering. That was the deal we made. That was the trade-off. We sacrificed the lower and middle income class in order to bail out all these people with PPP loans and, all this other stuff that we did during the pandemic.